Ever catch yourself saying the same thing over and over in your head? And then you wonder if those words are actually, doing something, shaping your reality, maybe.
Hmm.
Okay, let's unpack this because today on the deep dive, we're diving straight into a really fascinating listener submitted source that explores exactly that. It's all about the surprisingly potent world of mantras and affirmations.
That's right. We've got a transcript here from the YouTube channel Aro Kalajiro Grafasi Investigations Romana. The video is called 474 RO Anastasia C279 P degree 1 Mantra. It details a hypnotic session with someone named Anastasia, and we're going to explore her perceptions of how mantras might actually work on, well, a deeper, maybe even energetic level.
Exactly. Now, for you, the learner, think of this as maybe your express ticket. You get to understand some potentially pretty intricate ideas without getting lost in, a maze of jargon or feeling overwhelmed. We're here to be your interpreters, pulling out the crucial insights and, fingers crossed, sparking some of those aha moments we all love.
So let's jump right in then. Under hypnosis, Anastasia shared her initial impressions of mantras. What struck you as most interesting there, right off the bat?
Well, what's really intriguing is the imagery she describes immediately. Sound waves of different shapes intertwining, which she perceives as a kind of timeline. And this timeline is marked with nodules. It's like each word of mantra makes contact with a specific point, a specific nodule on this timeline, signifying a new level, she says, and the completion of a program.
That's a very vivid way to picture it, isn't it? How language might literally leave its mark. So for you, the learner, the key insight there could be that consistency, that repetition, those touches on the timeline. That might be how beliefs really start to take root, maybe on an energetic level.
Precisely. And as we delve into what she calls the energetic bodies, you can think of these as interconnected layers of our being. Beyond just the physical, her descriptions get even richer. For the mental body, for instance, she perceives mantras as an installation of a program, or even an auto-installation, which links directly back to this idea of words creating internal instructions, right?
Right, almost like you're writing code for your own subconscious mind. Then she mentions the sexual body. Its perceived role is supporting and potentiating this mental program. So it's not the driver, but it's providing the energy somewhat automatically based on the mental request.
Okay, but then there's the emotional body, and here's where it gets really interesting.
Yes, the emotional body. That's where we see the potential for friction, for maybe some kind of imbalance. Anastasia suggests it can experience this imbalance if the mantra isn't actually in sync with your essence.
Hmm?
Which, raises a pretty important question for all of us about authenticity, about the intention behind the words we use.
Absolutely. And speaking of intention, let's talk about that seemingly simple but powerful phrase, I am. According to Anastasia's perception in the transcript, mantras starting with I am carry the most weight. Why is that? What's the perceived reason?
Well, the crucial element seems to be identification. By starting with I am, the affirmation feels like it's becoming a fundamental part of who you are. It gets woven right into your sense of self.
Which sounds great, on the surface, but there's a potential downside, isn't there? A perceived risk.
Exactly. The integration process that she links to these I am statements,
Yeah.
it can be tricky if you're not really aware of what you're doing. Anastasia suggests you could unintentionally integrate things that don't serve you, or maybe are even harmful. If you're not conscious of what follows those two really potent words, it's like saying, this is me, to something, without fully getting what that something entails.
That makes a lot of sense. It's quite a responsibility then. Now, the transcript also touches on the idea of subliminal practice. What were Anastasia's insights there?
She perceived a kind of duality, I suppose. For positive mantras repeated subliminally, there seems to be an independent effect. It works. However, with less positive ones, she gets this image of the subliminal aspect spinning in a circle, almost like it's trapped, unable to express itself fully or fluidly. A powerful image of negativity being, well, restricted.
It really is. Like, it gets stuck. Okay, so what about people who don't believe in mantras or don't actively use them? Does the transcript suggest they're just unaffected?
Not at all, actually. Anastasia's perception is that mantras still have an impact, even on non-believers. The repetition itself creates what she calls a subliminal sequence at the unconscious level. This points to the idea that words themselves possess a power of creation. They form waves, she says, that lengthen when spoken.
Wow. So belief makes it stronger, but the effect is there regardless.
That's the idea. Belief intensifies it, definitely. But an effect still exists without conscious belief. So even just, mindlessly repeating something negative could still be planting some kind of seed.
That's a pretty sobering thought, isn't it? The transcript then moves into a comparison. Someone who believes versus someone who doesn't, both reciting mantras. What did Anastasia observe?
She perceived a significantly greater effect on the believer. Visually, she describes seeing DNA-like strands forming around both individuals. But there were fewer strands, forming a kind of tunnel-like structure around the non-believer, whereas the believer had many, many more strands.
And the mantras themselves were different too, right? The believers was more involved.
Yes, exactly. The believer's mantra was longer. It seemed to contain elements like purify me, align me, and I am, but connected with something external, like guides me. Almost like a prayer for assistance, you could say. The non-believer's I am affirmations were perceived as simpler, things like I am beautiful.
Interesting. So the complexity and maybe the intention behind the mantra matters too. This brings us back to the power and perhaps the nuance of I am. Let's explore the impact of those I am so-and-so affirmations in more detail. Anastasia perceived two distinct ways these could play out depending on, well, on what?
Exactly. It depends on whether the statement aligns with what she perceives as your core essence. So something like I am power, if it resonates truthfully, is seen as positive. However, if it involves comparison and a sense of superiority like I am smarter than others, that's perceived to generate imbalance and vulnerabilities.
So it's that comparison trap again. So for you, the learner, the big takeaway around I am affirmations really seems to be check your ego at the door. Authenticity trumps superficial positivity, maybe.
That's a great way to put it. That ego piece really is a recurring theme. Even seemingly positive ones like I am rich, I am beautiful, I am smart. How did those compare to something like I am power in her perception?
Yeah, what was the difference there?
Well, I am power seemed to resonate at a higher level, according to the perception. But the others, rich, beautiful, smart, were still seen as having a generally beneficial influence. They improves the connection between the physical and subliminal aspects. However, that underlying caution about I am remained. Affirmations driven by ego, not based on genuine self-awareness or knowledge, can create vulnerability through that integration process we talked about. It's like installing faulty software.
It really seems to boil down to the why behind the I am, doesn't it? The source of it. What about when people use mantras internally, just as part of their own private thoughts?
Anastasia perceived these internalized mantras often function as personal assurances, things like self-validation, offering support to oneself, or maybe just a way to quiet nagging doubts. It really highlights that constant internal conversation we all have, and how it acts like a continuous stream of self-affirmations, good or bad.
Right, shaping our internal landscape constantly. And on the for worse side, what specific negative mantras did Anastasia identify? Were there clear examples?
Yes, the I am more than or I am better than statements, rooted in ego in comparison. Those were clearly flagged as negative. They create a limiting environment, apparently. And interestingly, also, those prayer-like mantras, where you're essentially ceding power, phrases like give me, do for me, guide me, those were also seen negatively in this context.
Interesting, the idea of giving away your own agency, even in your internal dialogue, that's quite subtle. Let's circle back quickly to those initial nodules on the timeline. The transcript confirms there were 6 of them. What's the perceived significance of that number, 6?
According to Anastasia's perception, these 6 nodules represent the number of repetitions, the threshold maybe,
Yeah.
needed for something, like a mantra, to reach a level of manifestation, to truly align with your being and start having a tangible effect.
So repetition isn't just about memorization. It's perceived as embedding something deeply, hitting that threshold. Now, the discussion also touches on Om and similar traditional mantras. How are those perceived differently compared to the I am statements?
Om and similar mantras were perceived to connect more directly with the emotional body. They created a zigzag wave visually, which was described as feeling more agitating than balancing. They were also noted as being less intense overall than the I am mantras.
And why less intense? What makes I am pack such a punch, according to this source?
It seems to stem from that strong connection of I am with the mental body, plus that automatic energy boost from the sexual body. It leads to significant mental activity. And the belief itself essentially creates a new reality, that auto-installation of programs we mentioned earlier.
Right, the auto installation. So these programs, installed by repeating I am, what are they like?
They're described as potentially becoming self-imposed limits. You create a self-constructed reality that might actually be more restrictive than what's objectively possible. It really depends on the specific mantra, of course, as we've discussed.
Can you give an example?
Well, an ego-driven I am the most or I am better than mantra could actually limit your opportunities
Yeah.
because you've mentally boxed yourself in. Maybe you dismiss possibilities or people that don't fit that narrow self-view. Think of it like your brain is a computer, right? For you, the learner, repeating these I am statements is like constantly clicking install on new software for how you see yourself in the world.
Mhm.
But you need to check the software source.
It's like building your own glass ceiling with your words. Wow. And on a more subtle level, how does this ego-driven self-talk manifest? What does it look like energetically?
Anastasia perceived it as an imbalance on a subtle plane, like an overly tilted scale, with uninterfered existence, maybe your authentic self on one side and ego on the other. And the ego side is heavier, pulling things out of balance.
The transcript then presents two really interesting, almost contrasting case studies. Let's start with the first one. The individual using negative affirmations, a 34-year-old man in America. What was observed about him?
Okay, so he apparently mentally repeats negative I am comparisons like I am better than them or similar. And he also acts on it by leaving negative comments online. Metaphysically, Anastasia perceived a hierarchical presence, an entity maybe, actually feeding off this negative energy he was generating.
Feeding off it. So did the entity cause the thoughts?
Not initially, it seems. The perception was that his repeated negative self-talk, his own mantras, created a vulnerability, an opening. This allowed the interference to attach, and then it started intensifying the negativity, amplifying it like a virus, as she put it.
And what was the perceived impact on his actual life? It doesn't sound good.
No, it sounds quite isolating. A real lack of genuine connections and significant emotional suffering underneath. His constant need to compare and feel superior apparently prevented him from forming real, meaningful relationships. This interference was perceived to have been going on for about 4 years.
4 years. And what about his future? Did she see anything?
Yeah.
Yes, a vision of him at age 60 is quite stark. A toxic marriage, where the wife was perceived as a victim harboring inner resentment. And he, meanwhile, mentally believed he was happy, sort of maintaining the facade. But underneath, there was this deep underlying void he wasn't acknowledging or dealing with.
Wow. That's a really powerful, if unsettling, illustration, how our internal language can potentially echo outwards. Now, let's shift to the second case study. The 43-year-old man in Slovenia, he uses positive I am affirmations, a different picture entirely.
Yes, quite different. The initial impression was calm. He was even visualized relaxing in a park. The perceived effect on his energetic bodies was one of equilibration, bringing things into balance.
So how did he use them? Was he just repeating I am happy all day?
It didn't seem like that. The example given was specific, him affirming I am calm when someone cut him off while driving. It showed him using these mantras as tools consciously to regain balance in specific challenging situations.
Okay, so it sounds less like constant rote repetition and more like intentional tools, used when needed to reinforce a desired state, maybe even if he had some underlying doubts at that moment. That feels much more grounded.
It does, doesn't it? A more practical application.
Yeah.
And the transcript, interestingly, concludes with this really thought-provoking final insight. It says, the absolute truth, you feel it within you. Linking it all back to our intuition, that subliminal gut feeling of what is genuinely right and good for us.
Trusting that inner knowing above all else. So, to bring it all together then, this deep dive into the YouTube transcript has offered us some truly fascinating and sometimes, cautionary perspectives, all on the perceived power of mantras and affirmations. The crucial distinction really seems to hinge on that line between negativity fueled by ego and positivity rooted in genuine intention or essence.
Absolutely. And it really encourages us, well, you, the learner, to maybe take a moment and reflect on your own internal dialogue. What kind of programs, positive or negative, might you be unintentionally installing through the thoughts and words you repeat day in, day out?
It really does make you ponder, doesn't it? If our repeated thoughts and words potentially hold such a profound influence, what realities are we actively shaping for ourselves? Consciously, or maybe more often, unconsciously? Or could understanding those nodules of repetition, that threshold idea, offer a tangible key to unlocking positive change in our lives? Lots to think about there. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We encourage you, as always, to think about what sources you might want us to explore in future sessions.